Hey guys, this is Mikro. I wanted to talk about a potential trade-off that you have for the next patch with the Great Axe Warhammer as well as other classes where you could be sacrificing the HP that you're going to be getting from the perk or from the bonus that they're going to be giving when the next patch arrives, which should be at the beginning of August. And when that happens, everyone's going to have an increased HP. When that increased HP comes, we have this conversation where maybe we can have this cut this HP for Shirking Empower, increase our damage by about 12%. On terms of Great Axe, and then from there we can look to use that damage to try to deliver more kills, which will kind of correspond with the effective HP increase for most players, so you're effectively going to be doing some more damage to the current patch, even though people are a lot tankier, and you're going to be a decent amount tankier as well. So going into some of that math, uh, in terms of like what you should be cutting, because if you're going to run this Shirking Empower, you have to cut one perk. You're not on your amulet. You're not going to be cutting stam recovery because stam recovery is broken. You could be cutting health, or you could be cutting your slash protection. If you were to cut that slash protection, you would be about 1.11 times as tanky as you are in the current patch. If you were to cut that health, you would be about 13% tankier. So this is 11%. This is 13% tankier. Uh, you generally that 13% tankier is worse because it only applies to slash, it doesn't apply to everything. So I would tend to go for the health route and be 11% tankier, as well as you could be healed a little bit more there where you have like that extra HP bonus that you can kind of take advantage of more. So that's going to be feeling about similar to the current patch. If you were to double down on both, you'd be about 24% tankier than you would be at a base, which for some people may be worthy. Like if you're on point, maybe the Shrinking Power bonus is not worth trading off for. But say if you're a quad group on the edge of point, you generally don't need that HP as much to live. That's where this kind of gets interesting. Or say you're a point player that tends to have very low deaths, like you have like less than 5 deaths, and you're just looking to increase your damage output. This is an option that may be interesting for you. In terms of like if you're an SNS and you're looking to cut, say your health for Divine or something like that, it's generally not worth it. But if you were to cut something for SNS, you would probably be cutting the actual health, not the slash. But if you were on a build with less old fortify or that kind of gem slot, that's where having the health is better. The reason why this is the thing is because old fortify scales quadratically, so the more old fortify you have, the better that old fortify gets. This is why when healers run like 50 thrust, bows would do like literally 0 damage, and this is why that's a thing in terms of the math. Moving on to kind of like simulation stuff, I ran this with 100,000 times per test case, but I have uh, the meta, and then I have what I would consider to be potentially a good trade-off for next patch. I have the meta Warhammer, and then what I would consider to be a good Warhammer for next patch. In terms of how this actually pans out, uh, meta for Great Axe being Enfeebling Maelstrom, Refreshing Move, Thwarting. Meta for Warhammer being Thwarting, Sundering Shockwave, and Attunement. But for mine, I said that you cut that you cut that attunement and you go for shirking on your Warhammer instead, because I think shirking generally does more damage. There's an argument that shirking is worse because it applies to it does not apply to AoEs, unlike attunement. My counter argument to that is that attunement version of that damage won't actually heal you from lifesteal from the Warhammer. So at that point, you're just kind of padding with that damage, and it doesn't matter what damage you're doing there. You're just looking to make your number bigger. And if you're playing for that way, you're not going to be maximizing your DPS of your Warhammer in general, which is from those half-heavy attacks that do so much damage. So overall, you're going to get big increases from the Great Axe from the Warhammer from going from this Shirking Empower route. In terms of on Great Axe, what your damage increase is, this is about a 12% damage increase in terms of like what your damage increase would be on the Warhammer. This is about, again, a 12% damage increase. Why is it a 12% damage increase? This is because you are not going to be maxing out on those buckets normally, because there is so much passive weaken in a clump fight, and when you don't max out on all those damage buckets, you're not getting the most value as you can compared to other things. So what I mean by that is a lot of people in this game are just like, hey, ignore everything that is empower base. Let's just go for as much base damage as we could possibly get because there's no cap to it. That's great, right? Turns out not so great. I went over this in a previous video that I talked about how if you max out your actual buckets, you end up doing more damage because of a concept that is very similar to compound interest, where you actually get more returns by multiplying by a slightly lesser value than multiplying by a bigger value. So if you're to multiply 1.5 versus multiplying like 0.25 times 0.25, that 0.25 or the 1.25 is going to turn out to be bigger than that 1.5. You're going to gain this like 6.25% extra damage or whatever, and it's the same concept here, where you're looking to maximize that empower as much as you can rather than putting everything into that base damage, and that will overall increase your actual damage output. So yeah, this is like a technique that you can go with next patch, even on a current patch, to be honest, because everyone's running 300 con, and you'll decrease your actual survivability, but in turn increase your damage significantly. The other thing to take it into consideration with this is that this is just a champion's amulet, so it's like a very cheap, arguable BIS for a lot of sets. So if you have a character that you say don't have BIS gear on, but they have a champion's amulet, well now you don't have to spend 400k to get like your BIS health slash stam because you can just run that shirking. You have arguably a better piece in terms of doing damage, but your effective HP is still going to go down by about 10%. So you're trading that 12% damage for 12% damage. You could, or 12% HP for 12% damage, like roughly. You could think of it that way. Is that worth it? Depends on the person. I would argue it's probably worth it, especially because if you cut this slash damage, that slash damage only applies to slash. It doesn't apply to Warhammer autos, which are very common right now. It doesn't apply to blunderbuss damage, doesn't apply to fire staff damage. There's a lot of stuff that slash damage doesn't apply to that's being run in the meta. It doesn't apply to those rain of arrows that are just one-shotting people off a point, versus that health will still apply. So even though this is a bigger number at 13%, that 13% is only applying to one tiny spectrum of the damage that's going to be incoming to you. So overall, I think it's still better to go for health, which means that Champion's Amulet may arguably be BIS next patch. With that being said, guys, I'll see you in the next video.